This is Melissa, and today is the 15th of June, 2025, and I hope you are all doing well. I was working away this afternoon and stopped to call my Aunt Betty, and she said, "I'm doing fine, but you called me during the military parade. I told you to watch it." I had forgotten that. So I said, "Okay, I'll let you go." And she said, "No, you must watch it." I said, "I will then, if I must." And so I did. And I saw tank after tank after tank rolling by, and lots of theatrics and acrobatic type displays and marching bands and human interest stories and young boys on the sidelines watching it all go by and loving every minute of it. I saw that the event was sponsored by Palantir, and I watched the people in the stands, and I looked them up. If I didn't recognize who they were, I looked at the name, and then I dug in a little bit. And one kind of overgrown frat boy type that I saw was Daniel Driscoll. So I looked him up. I hadn't noticed him before. And he is the 26th United States Secretary of the Army. And this is a civilian posting. In other words, he's not in the Army, but he did go to Yale Law School, and he was a classmate of Vice President J.D. Vance. So essentially what I was seeing in a variety of different ways is the clubby aspect of politics. Yeah, everybody knows everybody, and you connect all these dots, and of course it's not just, oh, they worked hard and they're the best person for the job. I saw somebody in the stands, a man that I hadn't noticed before, and he was kind of nondescript, but the woman sitting next to him was good looking and wearing a very short skirt. And I wasn't concerned about the short skirt so much as when she bent over, I was a little fearful of what might give way there. But the cameraman panned away, so we were saved her embarrassment. And it turned out that he was Steve Witkoff, and that was his girlfriend. He's still married, separated from his wife, but he travels around with his golf influencer girlfriend. And Steve Witkoff, right here in Wiki, it says he's an American real estate investor and lawyer who has served as the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East since 2025. And he's the founder and chairman of the Witkoff Group. That's real estate. He's a Jewish American born in the Bronx, raised on Long Island, the son of Martin Witkoff, blah, blah, blah. Okay. He made the Forbes World's Billionaires list in May of 2025. So during the first presidency of Donald Trump, Witkoff was a member of the Great American Economic Revival Industry Groups. Boy, did they make that whole event was just nothing but a war exercise. It was war on the people and everything around it. You know, the Great American Economic Revival Industry Groups. Wow, that's a mouthful. That were created to combat the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. And then in November of 2024, President-elect Donald Trump announced that he would appoint Witkoff to be the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East. Now, I'm just saying that if you look him up, you're going to find out that he travels all over the place and he does this and that, but most of the pundits agree that he hasn't really been able to achieve anything. And I had made this point to somebody who, I'll just say that they think it's all real. Politics it's real, and we're seeing it unfold in real time, and nothing is planned in advance. In other words, a normal person. And they said, well, Trump just needs somebody that he can trust. And it doesn't matter that this guy's crude and crass and, from the Bronx, whatever. He's he's Trump's friend, and Trump needs somebody to trust him because, that's just the way it is. So I dug in a little bit, as I sometimes like to do when I just get an idea that I need to find out more about that person. And I found his estranged wife and stories about the sons and so forth. And he's got a son who hangs out in Miami and does real estate and married a model, and that didn't last but a few months. But I kept seeing the son popping up at those kind of Miami society events, parties and so forth. And then there was a picture of the son with a couple of guys, and I look at their name and I'm like thinking to myself, those two Miami realtors were just brought up on sex trafficking charges about 6 months ago. I remember them. And sure enough, that's right. That's what happened. I don't know if it's two of the three brothers. I think it's just two. There's three realtor brothers. They're Israeli American, and they do real estate, or did luxury real estate in Miami. And they got brought up on lots of sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking charges. Tal and Oren Alexander. And there's a picture of Alex Witkoff hanging out with him. Now, I'm not saying, all I'm saying is it's people who know each other. That's it. No speculation, nothing, just people who know each other. Small world. But this person who sees things, as history is just, it's events are unfolding in real time. And they're a loyal supporter of Trump. And even though Trump said, everybody's angry with Trump right now because he said he would not be deporting people that worked in the food service industries and so forth. And evidently there's been a huge social media outcry over this because, naturally, those were his rank and file supporters, the people who didn't, like all of the illegal immigration. And there's Trump just saying it, just outright not going to deport them. But this person, nothing really puts him off of Trump. And they said that, again, he needed somebody to trust, and he trusted Witkoff. He said, I have, there's just two choices here. Either Trump is misinformed and he doesn't have any allies, and he needs an ally. He needs good information from somewhere, or else he's a monster. And I choose to see him as being misinformed. So there you go. They're kind of skirting close to possibly being able to see what is, but they will not see it. And it reminded me of a talk that I was listening to earlier in the week of Alan's, and he was discussing with the host the people at the top and the things in this particular case. He was talking about the book Deadly Allies and the kinds of work that they do in labs trying to do things like ethnic specific viruses or some things in that vein. And Alan said, the people at the top are monsters. And the sooner we get that through our heads, that they are psychopathic monsters, the closer we'll be to stopping all of this chaos. And the host said, they have no consciences at all, do they? And Alan said, they have none. No, in fact, I think they're being very practical. So that's what I'm saying, is monsters at the top. But in this talk that I chose to go up today, and I'll tell you what that is right now, December 22, 2019. Trump, 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 the boys are marching. Will or won't we hit Iran? Resurrect WMD, fuzzy photos, let us see. Then send us all the refugees you can. So yeah, Trump, Trump, Trump. The boys are marching. And in this talk, Alan just laid it right out. He said, as I've said before, not everyone can handle truth. We've all experienced that, I'm sure, talking to some people who are nice people. But you see their eyes clouding over, because when you give someone truth on something and you're not berating them, like some kind of street evangelist, accusing them of anything, but where you're just telling them some quiet truth, all truth requires a response from the individual. Because knowing something, just knowing something, makes you have to decide things. We're quite happy to decide things if we don't have to act on anything. But some truths almost demand that you act, even if it's just something so simple as occasionally telling a person about the same conclusion you come to on a matter. But when it comes to overloading a person, never overload a person with too much information. They'll switch off quite naturally too. When you've had a lifetime of indoctrination, especially with the drivel they give you today called news, do you really expect them to just say, oh, I understand it all. Okay, thanks for telling me. So that's how it is. Most people can't handle the truth. It's pretty tough. And it's clear here for those of us, especially who've had the benefit of listening to Alan Watt for a long time, we can see that the names are interchangeable. So in this talk, when Alan is talking about Trump and his possible role in Iran, and it's 2019, here we just have Trump again in 2025. And when he's talking about Boris Johnson, they had to get Jeremy Corbyn out so that they could get somebody who was better aligned with the war. It just exchanged Boris Johnson for Keir Starmer, because they're all interchangeable when there is an agenda. So this is how Keir Starmer is playing it. He confirms that the UK is moving jets to the Middle East. This is Saturday, 14 June. But he urges Israel and Iran to de-escalate. The UK is moving jets and other military hardware to the Middle East to provide contingency support. The Prime Minister has briefed reporters as he flies to the G7 summit of the leaders of the world's richest democracies. He said the focus of his diplomacy at the summit, which will take place in Canada, would be to put pressure on Israel and Iran to de-escalate, to scale back their attacks on each other. I got a message from, a note from Neil Foster, and he has a different perspective on de-escalation. He said, I think that the attack will bring on World War III in some form. There will be one or more false flags in the US and Europe to drag the gullible public into supporting yet another war in the Middle East. But if it does indeed go global, then it is the perfect planned agenda to bring in the Great Reset as the West is pushed into total poverty and subjugation to keep them safe. And he goes on with further thoughts on this, and then he paraphrased Alan, no piece on the chessboard is moved until all possible moves have been studied and countermeasures put into place. I had an email from someone else who lives in Europe, and they wrote a couple of days ago or yesterday, and they said, yesterday, they said, I heard of the Israeli attack on Iran. It's so creepy that the textbooks get followed so closely. And this person went on to tell me of their connections to people living in Israel, friends, family, and so forth. And they said, Most of the Israelis I know are strictly against Netanyahu, and there were big demonstrations for another political direction. Most people, and they say the name of the town where their connections are, the name of the place in Israel. They were fighting for human rights for Palestinians, driving them to hospitals in Israel, and doing work to change the situation. Now, a significant part of them are filled with hate because of what happened, but not all of them. Some understand what is going on. A significant part of Israelis were no longer willing to follow a path of war. So they're feeding both sides for decades with hate and fear. And this is true. I just mailed one of Alan Watts' books to someone in Israel who is very concerned about what is happening. And we have to understand that all of us, regardless of where we live, what our identity, our national identity is, our ethnicity, our religion, we've had a number done on us. We've been under a significant amount of propaganda for our entire lifetimes. So just something to think about. Later on in this talk, Alan said he's just talking about people who are unwilling to read a news article or listen to or dive into serious study of something because he said, as the Bible says, they have itchy ears. They want the entertainment value of it. I looked that up in the Bible. I like to see things, I like to read things in different translations, no matter what it is that I'm reading. In the Bible, particularly, if I look it up, I want to see what versions have to say. So the King James Version says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears." So this is about what Alan said a little bit earlier, right? About how you go about trying to educate people. You can't do it, just like a crazy person yelling. And if someone is even capable, because as Alan said, most people can't handle the truth. Now, the other side of what he was saying is it's a choice. Because some truth comes with it, the knowledge. The person has the knowledge that if they understand this, if they accept it, if they let this truth into their head, they've got to do something. They've got to change, usually themselves. And that's where they don't want to go. So this is from a translation called God's Word Translation, and it gives you itchy ears, not with a different way of saying it, and it gives it to you in the context of a couple of verses. This is 2 Timothy 4, 2 through 4. "Be ready to spread the word, whether or not the time is right. Point out errors, warn people, and encourage them. Be very patient when you teach. A time will come when people will not listen to accurate teachings. Instead, they will follow their own desires and surround themselves with teachers who tell them what they want to hear. People will refuse to listen to the truth and turn to myths." And so we are maybe learning about human nature, that it's always been this way, that people can't handle the truth. Most people can't handle the truth. So you look for clues, receptivity, and so forth. And then you are very patient when you teach. But remember that They will follow their own desires and surround themselves with teachers who tell them what they want to hear. And I encounter this a lot because it's more interesting to find out about some arcane, esoteric, occult thing than just the cold, hard truth. Something, for instance, like, yes, they're monsters at the top. They are monsters at the top. So just quickly, because Alan shared a Paul Craig Roberts article in this, I looked up to see what Paul Craig Roberts might have to say about this. And he wrote an article called Iran the Unready. And I will let you read that. I'm just going to highlight a couple of lines from it, and then I'll post it. And if you don't have itchy ears, as Alan went on to say, and you're interested in reading and studying and thinking about it, then you'll find that story and you can read it for yourselves. But Paul Craig Roberts said, the American public never learns either. The American people have been fed a constant diet of war propaganda against Iran for many years, going back to the Carter years in the 1970s, when Iranians overthrew the American puppet ruler, the Shah of Iran, and established their revolution, thus depriving the U.S. and the British of control over Iran's oil. 9/11, an inside job that Washington blamed on Muslims in order to launch wars against 7 countries, served to legitimize Washington's 21st century wars in the Middle East. Israel has taken advantage of Washington's alignment of Americans with Israel's interest and has been for years in the forefront of encouraging war between the U.S. and Iran for Israel's gain. Just a couple of other articles that I will post. This is from also June 14, 2025. Mike Pompeo, Israel's strikes on Iran are righteous and the whole world is benefiting. Israel's daring strikes represent shared American interests against a regime that has killed hundreds of Americans through terrorism. I will also post something from AIPAC, the United States-Israel Defense Partnership Act of 2025. And this from the Jerusalem Post, because this is the fact. Israeli official to the Jerusalem Post. There was full and complete coordination with the Americans. We presented the American administration with evidence of Iran's breakthrough toward a nuclear bomb. There was full and complete coordination with the Americans. An Israeli official told the Post, okay, so that's a repeat there. Iran's armed forces spokesperson accused Israel of carrying out attacks against Iran with U.S. support. This comes after Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement, "Tonight Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We were not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region." But that is not what the Israeli official said. He said, "We presented the American administration with evidence of Iran's breakthrough toward a nuclear bomb. There was full and complete coordination with the Americans." Let's just one more time, very quickly, here are those 4 lines from Alan Watt, December 22, 2019. Trump, 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 the boys are marching. Will or won't we hit Iran? Resurrect WMD. Fuzzy photos, let us see. Then send us all the refugees you can. So remember, WMD, weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. An Israeli official said, "We presented the American administration with evidence of Iran's breakthrough toward a nuclear bomb, WMD. It's just the same script over and over and over again." I'm also going to post something from John Whitehead, Future of Freedom Foundation. Trump's Palantir-powered surveillance is turning America into a digital prison, June 10, 2025. He leads this article off with a quote from Ayn Rand. "We are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while the citizens may act only by permission." Whitehead said, "Call it what it is, a panopticon presidency." President Trump's plan to fuse government power with private surveillance tech, that's Palantir, that's the people who sponsored the military parade. To build a centralized national citizen database is the final step in transforming America from a constitutional republic into a digital dictatorship armed with algorithms and powered by unaccountable, all-seeing artificial intelligence. This isn't about national security, it's about control. According to news reports, the Trump administration is quietly collaborating with Palantir Technologies. It's not so quiet anymore. They've been pretty upfront with what they're doing. Palantir, the data mining behemoth co-founded by billionaire Peter Thiel, groomed J.D. Vance for his vice presidential position to construct a centralized, government-wide surveillance system that would consolidate biometric, behavioral, and geolocation data into a single weaponized database of Americans' private information. And one last thing to leave you with. Palantir's CEO is Alex Karp. He just loves what's going on in the Middle East. Palantir's billionaire CEO just can't stop talking about killing people. This is a quote from him. "Palantir is here to disrupt and make the institutions we partner with the very best in the world. And when it's necessary, to scare enemies and on occasion kill them," Karp said with a smile on his face. The CEO added that he was very proud of the work his firm is doing and that he felt it was good for America. "I'm very happy to have you along for the journey," he said. "We are crushing it. We are dedicating our company to the service of the West and the United States of America, and we're super proud of the role we play, especially in places we can't talk about." Well, it would appear that one of those places that they won't talk about is turning the guns on Americans, as Alan Watt always said they would do. So I will leave you with this talk, and in spite of the fact that it is bleak, well, it's bleak, but at the very minimum, it's serious. And for those of us who can handle the truth, let's remember that part of the truth is we still have humanity, and this is what is at stake. So I wish you all the very best in the face of this, because it's giving, the propaganda wants us to cave right in to fear and hate. That's an important aspect of it. So rising above and seeing the big picture and not letting ourselves be manipulated. This is a good thing. Have a good week.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 22nd of December 2000. COVID-19. I hope you're all hanging in there in the colder climates that seem to be impervious to the supposed global warming we're having. Because the temperatures here have been absolutely frigid for a long time. And I've found that in the last few years, the winters are lasting longer and becoming heavier, in fact, with snow and so on. But right now, it's not just the snow, it's incredibly cold temperatures, often down to about 10, 15, 20 below the freezing mark, and Fahrenheit, that is, right? At night. And not much better during the day. I think the other day there it didn't get above the 0 mark. And this occasionally will happen at the end of December into January, although February is often the worst month for being cold, very, very cold temperatures. As I say, the more global warming we get, the colder it is here, and the longer the winters for sure. Mind you, they were spraying like crazy the other day, the trails back and forth across the sky. Where I am, in the Sudbury area, I'm well outside Sudbury. And Sudbury itself only has 2 or 3 planes a day going up and down. The sky was littered with the trails of jets back and forth all over the place. So I won't even go into the things they call. You can, as you quote the actual articles from universities and so on, and people involved on the panels of geoengineering, as they call it, when you quote them, you're called the conspiracy theorist. Isn't it amazing today where the psychological warfare is so great, you're immediately slandered by the establishment or its agencies, just for noticing things. I remember 2 years ago, I was thinking about that too. I was on a show by Stanley Monteith. He had a really good show. He asked me, he says, tell me something about yourself. What made you, he knew I was up there and understanding what was happening and so on, about information. And he says, what made you, or brought you to the stage where you understood things? And I quipped, I joked. I said, well, I think I was born with a form of autism that helped me see the world as it really was. And I don't think he really caught that I was joking about it, but that's how it really is. Maybe you're lucky or unlucky, it depends on how you see it, because ignorance, they say, is bliss. And having knowledge about what's happening doesn't make you terribly happy at times, because you see an incredible evil, and that's the only word I can use, is evil, of powerful institutions and sometimes countries and things that they do. And again, the incredible gain that those at the top of these different institutions and countries gain for themselves financially and for positions of power as they get boosted up a ladder, because there definitely is a big global agenda here. We are so brainwashed. We're brought up to be brainwashed into Plato's cave. And I used to give talks about Plato's cave, and then it became awfully popular and everybody started to use it. But the idea is, if you're born in the cave, and you can never look backwards to the mouth of the cave, and so all you see is a shadows cast by the firelight on the walls and so on, and the elders will sit and discuss what all these shadows mean, because they haven't got a clue what's outside, or even if there is an outside. The one person gets out and travels about the world and comes back and tells them, and they want to kill him because he's disrupting their belief system of reality. That all the reality is now in jeopardy, and he's threatened to be killed and murdered. Well, that is the real world you're in. Yet we're all in Plato's cave. We're brought up to be in Plato's cave. When you go through, and you should take some time and do it, so much of the declassified information on psychological warfare from government agencies, you'd be astonished. Just that alone, never mind the much, much bigger and deeper and secretive agendas to do with brainwashing you, average citizenry. Because we're targets. Populations are targets of a global agenda, quite naturally. And those at the top want to fill their pockets awfully well as they bring the world into terrible conflicts in order to get the resolutions further along the road to the global governmental system. They have no problem at the top of filling their pockets. In fact, you can see that what's going on even with some of the, like Biden's son in the news, and the money he's been getting for nothing, basically. And the thing is, the people at the top really believe it's their right to plunder you. They honestly do. You have to look into the people who are at the top, and they have a very deep belief that they have the right to plunder you. And there's nothing wrong with it. And I could go much, much deeper, but I won't. But we're living in a world today that's on the edge. It's always on the edge, mind you, because we're brought up living in crisis, one crisis after another, financial or war, whatever it happens to be. And as I used to say, when I thought back over the 20th century, even from the 19th century, it was just one crisis after another. People don't know that there was a depression in the 1800s, one in the late 1800s, there had been a few, but in the late 1800s, when three bankers in the US did a similar thing that Soros did much later with Britain, and crashed the economy and plundered it. And then in Britain, for instance, you had wars on the go. The Boer War, they had occupied a good part of India too, and in Africa, but they had the Boer War with the Dutch settlers, and because they all wanted the gold and the diamonds and so on. Because those at the head of the Alfred Milner group it was, their kindergarten and so on, they became the Royal Institute for International Affairs -- Council on Foreign Relations. They said quite openly that they wanted to take over the world and bring in, they called it a British system. Well, the British folk would probably say, oh, that's quite nice, but it's nothing you do with the British system until you get out the cave and realise that the British system isn't your system. You understand? And nothing's changed. And the group that ran it in Milner's day, often they had their descendants running it today, in fact, some of them. And again, feeling they're very, very wealthy today with the plunder they've got and so on. But that's a rightful place to do it, you see. As they're helping you all come to a world peace, it's only right they reward themselves with lots of loot. You understand? That's how they rationalise things. But it's fascinating to, as I say, have the insight into it. So much of it growing up, at least you could glean from books in some of the libraries in Britain. I'm sure they've all gone. Most of the books have gone now, mind you. But back then, you could peruse lots of books put out by under memoirs and so on, and biographies, not autobiographies, of people who were players in the game, the big game for world empire and world control, and they would tell you their goals to do with gaining finances, etc., and having a secure financial system across the planet, as long as they themselves run it, you see. That was part of the plan. But they also believed in really accumulating the world's resources and under a handful, or maybe even a dozen or 24 corporations. Everything that you would need as a nation, or a bunch of nations, to survive, everything, that's your energy, your food, everything, to be eventually owned by a few corporations. And then you'd have total power over the world, all for peace, you understand. In reality, you'd have billions of people totally subservient to you, and you'd have a massive bureaucracy deciding how many calories would get dished out here, there, and elsewhere. Well, nothing's really changed. It's just more dressed up in scientific terminology today, with many disguises, sustainability, etc., to achieve the same goals. But those at the top, still, of course, and they do have incredible power over everything you need to survive, all kinds of energy. You try and survive in Canada, you could bring where I am, my area here in Ontario, to its knees, where I live, if they forbid you to cut wood, for instance, to heat yourself in the winter. They've done their best already, and lots of folk are quite happy, fork out massive sums of money, either for oil heating for their furnaces, or propane in this area. But a standby for so many people, especially in emergencies too, because when the electricity goes out with winds and storms and so on here, then you have to have some way of heating it or you die. You see, that's what happens. And so you need the wood as a standby. But I can remember even as far back as the 90s when some of the far global left-wingers at that time wanted to ban chainsaws, for instance, and things like that. But these are things which are vital for even emergency survival. So can you imagine what happens when you have a few companies using government, mind you, getting government to pass laws and so on, so that you must use their resources, their energy, which the corporations own, and so on. So you're living under a fascist system that pretends it's really there for the people. It's socialistic, but really socialism, fascism is the same darn thing when government is used to enforce policies of corporations. And you have to get out of the terminology that can mislead you. As I say, they keep camouflaging themselves all the time, all for the social good, you understand. They take your rights away from you. But again, back to technocracy, as I've mentioned before, that was their agenda. They would own all, the group at the top, the proper folk, you see, the folk who saw themselves as entitled to run the world and own it all too, would be dispensing of energy here, there, and so on in a very humane way, because they had far more virtue, you see, than the average peasant. And nothing has honestly changed, except the colluding with so many different sections and paying scientists off to give them the proper propaganda that confuse the general public, so you can give up all your rights and so on, and just accept it, again, for the greater good and for your own survival. Crisis, crisis, crisis. So from the 1800s, bank collapses, all brought about, and these collapses made, actually today it would be billions of dollars in today's money. The three bankers that collapsed the economy in the States happened. In fact, it was their big crash that brought about that helped eventually. The next part of the con, we need an organization to stop this from happening, and so they gave the Federal Reserve to America, you see. And the bankers who caused it all ended up running it all. It's quite fantastic to see the cons that go on. And that's what I was talking to Dr. Stanley Monteith about, was how the cons are, you can actually see them, how they start them, and how they build to what they want, and step by step by step. The public, who are always in a state of panic or fear, are only seeing that to the end of their nose and no further, because they want to survive. That's a survival mode. And they're stampede from one step to the next step to the next, all parts of the plan, until you're totally in a system of a form of slavery, really. That's what it is. Slavery can take many forms. Again, don't be deceived by terminology. Slavery, remember, was being used. You're being used as an animal by those who own you, by using your labor to do whatever work that the owners wanted done. And that's why they couldn't tax labor for a long time. They always wanted it, were chomping at the bit, because after all, and they had meetings. I remember even getting the papers on it, the meetings that they had about slavery in the 1800s. And the Rothschilds family were involved in drafting up a very clever plan. This isn't conspiracy. You can actually find it, where they advised America, the slave owners of the America. And they weren't all in the South, by the way, as you well know, hopefully. But they advised them, it's far better if you could introduce a taxation form and get money from the work of everybody. That way, you won't have to feed the slaves. And when slaves get old, you have to keep them and feed them. And otherwise, the rest of the slaves might just have had enough and overthrow you. You see, that's what was absolutely honestly discussed as a matter of fact business proposition. But he said, if you could just have a system that they'd already brought into Britain, actually, very early on, of a centralized banking system where the government would be helped is the word, I guess, to borrow from the centralized bank, which was still private, but given a very national name, you see. And with a guarantee that the money that was borrowed by the government, for whatever it was, like an example, foreign wars, for instance, would be paid back to the bank that helped fund it all by the bank's right to tax. But they could also disguise that by having a separate government agency set up, an independent agency that would do the taxing for this bank. I'm not kidding you. It's fascinating to read this. And then the population would have to pay taxes on their labour, you see. And after a generation, that's only sort of 20, 25 years or so, they could say that the public would accept that. They start to forget that it wasn't always this way. We would adapt very quickly, you see. And that way, you could have wars across the world for plunder and different things like that, borrow from the bank to finance it, and the bank would be happy to get it all back in tax collection. It wasn't unusual. That used to be the way in the Middle Ages, when kings and queens, when they didn't have the kind of governments that they have today, the kings and queens would borrow for their treasury or for their armies or whatever it happened to be. And they brought in foreigners to collect the taxes. They would lend the money to the government on the condition that they would literally go round and collect the taxes. Long history of all. But it's astonishing. See, labour couldn't be taxed for a long, long time because you were either free or you were a bondsman. You were held under debt, you see. And even tax that they claimed you owed was then considered as debt if you didn't pay it off. Fascinating stories doing it all. But again, everybody pays it today. Why? Because you're afraid. You're afraid. And as long as you're earning enough to get by, and you got lots of entertainment and so on, you tend to put these things to the side. Oh, well, what else can we do? Yada, yada, yada. And no one wants to stick their head up and say, well, stop paying your taxes. And you know how far you'll get with that anyway. But we're all slaves. Of course we're slaves. And I mentioned before that Charles Galton Darwin, who was one of the many people who helped work with Bertrand Russell and the Macy Group and all the other groups that helped create the present system and culture for that we're living in today, with the changes that they would bring in. Because the whole culture was reinvented, basically, post-World War II, for those who didn't know. And it was authorized by even the President of the United States at the time, at the end of the war. And Britain played along with it too, naturally. So anyway, this system is well underway. Many things have been achieved. And the same goals that were set up back in the 1800s, late 1800s, by Lord Alfred Milner, that became, as I say, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, private organization with a Royal Charter, to set up a world empire based on the British system. As I getting back to my original point, you understand what they're saying. It has two meanings. The British system is a completely different system ruling over Britain than the people who are brought and raised up in Britain understand it. They have no idea either. But the ones who own them call it the British system, you see. It's quite fascinating. And yeah, it's the Plato's Cave syndrome. People are very docile today. Getting back to what I says with The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. He said slavery in his book, slavery has always existed in one form or another, and I suppose it will continue to exist. You understand what they're saying? In one form or another. And everyone who votes thinks they're free, but they're not. You're not free at all. You have so many obligations put upon you, even to be a citizen. And part of the obligation is to pay taxes, you see. If you pay taxes on your labour, then no, you're not free at all. You're a slave, but you're a self-sustaining slave because you pay for your own clothing, for your food and your shelter, and to keep alive. You pay for it all yourself. And it's far better that way. And you even pay for either a retirement fund or into one, or whatever it happens to be, to take care of you when you get old and sickly. And of course, now, we can get euthanasia, and it's much more efficient, isn't it, for the system that we're in. We truly are running in a very clever system, and it's not conspiracy. Actually, it's perfect in a sense, because most of the folk never figure it out. That's how perfectly you're raised in the Plato's cave. Perfect conditioning works very, very well. It is perfect conditioning. Where people will say, oh, that's crazy. That's crazy, Because it's unthinkable that these things happen, and you're trained to believe things in the way that you do believe. And you might even go off and fight for things, thinking it's all right and true. And many did. That was the way in my generation that thought that was the right way to be, to fight the terrible Cold War of the terrible communist system. Never realizing, of course, that so much of that was bogus too. And those who ran it all, way above you all, were going to use it to bring in a global society with all the learned things from the social Soviet experiment incorporated into the new system. The same thing that they found in the States when they had the Congress sent out the commissions to investigate. I think it was actually the Senate was sent them out, and Norman Dodd was sent out under the Reece Commission to find out why the big tax-free foundations, these really billionaires really, who ran them, who owned them, these private families and their private foundations, that financed armies of NGOs and social movements and so on, why they seemed to be promoting communism. Your top capitalists were promoting communism, and eventually, I think it was the head of the Ford Foundation at the time, told them, Norman Dodd, he said, we work to change the culture that eventually the Soviet system and the American system can be blended together event down the road. And so the techniques that the Soviet used, they found out what worked and what didn't work, were blended into the system. And I would say we're far more obedient today, especially in America, than they used to be. At one time, Americans individually would stand up when their rights and freedoms were threatened. But today, much, much less so. Much less so. So, again, perfect conditioning works awfully well. And then again, every country under the United Nations had a department after the war, a culture department. Britain, America, Canada, all these different countries, a department of culture. And I used to, when I was young, and at school, I thought, why would you have a department of culture when we are the people and we are the culture? Well, the whole point of it is to change the culture, and committees that work on what they saw as necessary changes that would have to be made in the culture. After the World War II, of course, they planned to destroy the cultures as they'd stood, and especially marriage. That was all the Marxian concepts, again, had to be fulfilled. The communist ones, the end of private property eventually, they hoped to achieve, except for the very, very wealthy. They wanted to wipe out the middle class. And they were awfully successful in doing it. They would bring in a form under the guise of free trade, of countries being interdependent, meaning no country could be nationalistic and totally self-sufficient in a peaceful world. So therefore, they make you all interdependent. So for vital things you would need as a nation to survive, you'd have to import them. You wouldn't be allowed to grow them or whatever it happens to be in your own country. And so you'd have to import them. You'd be interdependent. And as far right up to Margaret Thatcher's day, she was pushing the same terminology, interdependence, which obviously meant you at the end of sovereignty. If you need other countries for your basic survival, then you will not be sovereign. And they had articles about that too, giving up sovereignty for peace, etc. The same thing was pushed. The exact same thing was pushed when 9/11 happened. The dust hadn't settled before all the papers on cue at the same time across America and Britain and elsewhere. Would you give up, and the man in the street interview, would you give up personal sovereignty or national sovereignty for safety? I mean, it was all orchestrated in advance. Of course it was. Nothing changes, but agendas go on. It's very sad. To me, it's very sad to look at the old books from, say, the 1970s or even earlier, much earlier, and you see the powerful players who were involved in the big think tanks that also had the ability to set up processes and committees to implement their policies from the think tanks, from the policies they came up with, and to see society being wrecked on cue, step by step by step, including with industry, where they said they would deindustrialize the West. Deindustrialize, you understand? Maurice Strong in Canada, with his biodiversity treaty, etc., part of the same sustainability agenda, was very vocal about the complete deindustrialization of the West and bringing us into a pre-industrial climate, basically, economic climate. So you're talking about subsistence, folks, basic subsistence, austerity. When you see it happening, and you see the people, and you've read their books of the players who helped set it all up, and again implemented, you have no option but to come to the conclusion that this is an agenda. Of course it's they tell you in their books it's an agenda. The United Nations Agenda 21 is called the United Nations Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. It was also called the Millennium Project. And they blended the two together. Now it's the next part is 2030. You see, but the agenda for the 21st century is for the whole, all the different things that have to be implemented and working before the century's through. Big changes. The end of rural living, right? With the guys, it'll be unsustainable to have roads in the country where occasional houses are, and houses that don't have nothing to do with farming, so they shouldn't exist there, etc., etc. Get everybody into the cities, and of course, the only folk you'll have in the country will be like the Russian elite and the Politburo and all the civil servants who will have their dash house in the country. You see, they'll be paid for by the taxpayer, no doubt. Nothing changes, except actually the occasional person here or there catches on to it. And for every person who has a natural ability to catch on to it and figure things out, you'll have 100 put out there to thwart you. At least, for every person who wakes up by themselves, that is an innate ability to do so, that person's a threat. And that person's noticed straight off the bat. And there'll be 100 at least, as I say, copycats put out, well-funded, who will use the same material that you're putting out and then spin it off into ridiculous things to discredit the material and the people who put it out, like yourself, who started it off perhaps. And that's called counterintelligence, because knowledge is power, and this kind of knowledge is awfully powerful. And so it doesn't just get along by itself. You must bring in all kinds of confusion into basic data, basic information. And when you bring in all the confusion and the ridiculousness of some of the things that are attached to it, you've got a good chance of discrediting the true information. Oh yeah, you'll be off and sucking blood off people's necks or something like that, or whatever it happens to be. You understand what I'm talking about, I'm sure. And that's called counterintelligence. Well funded. And when you see people who have books that just churned out more, I've seen people who put more books out per year than I go to the bathroom. Well, of course they don't write them. And as you go through their books, sure enough, whoever really, or agencies that put them together, just take whole chapters of every other book out there by genuine people, throw it together, then put in the spin. That's how it's done, folks. It costs money to do all that. Big money. Big money. Absolutely. Even to get your books promoted across the world takes big money. You really start thinking about things and stop just following people. Counterintelligence. Counter. You counter the intelligence by ridiculing it eventually. And when you see something that's absolutely ridiculous being promoted by someone, and that person's promoted by other. You got to, these people must see what's going on. Of course they see what's going on. There's very little out there today that's genuine. Very little, honestly. Absolutely. And other folk were put out of the picture altogether, completely, financially and so on. That's how they generally get you out of the way. And the dirty tricks that go on, you would not believe behind the scenes. Because people really want to believe they're free. They truly want to believe that. It's a sad commentary that most folk, and I suppose it's the same with the studies that they say were done on revolutions in the past. But most folk go by the statistics of previous experiments, like the US, for instance, in its war for independence, whatever the real cause, and I really have my suspicions about it too. And I think people should have some healthy suspicions about things, of the founders and so on. But they say there was only 3% of the US population at that time. 3%. So you would say three men at that time, 3 men out of every 100 actually partook in the fighting against Britain at that time. So I would imagine that's a pretty good average of times from other experiences of humanity in different countries for different things too. It's always a small minority who actually do the heavy work, or dying, or whatever it happens to be. But in a society of living today of information and excess data, where I've even read the articles put out by counterintelligence agencies talking about data, overloading the public with data, you see, until they switch off. And then you give them conflicting data. First, it's an image that's very similar to the data, like a duplication. And then you tack the spin onto it, and then more spin. But eventually, you've got opposing mirror image data that causes total cognitive dissonance, they call it. And it works awfully well, this technique. And today, with mass communication, and everyone's carrying their cell phones and so on, and getting the same news from the same sources and so on and so on and so on, it's so simple to do. So simple and very effective. But we're living through an amazing time when we're seeing, they call it a deep state in America. Well, London's got this deep state. Of course it has. I've talked before about assassination squads that MI5 and MI6 have. Remember the movie The Good Shepherd, which was very tame in actuality of how things are done in reality. I had to laugh too with the whole the thing about Britain and the Skripal case with the poisoning and all that, and blaming Russia and yada yada yada. And so much evidence has come out since then to really make it a laughing stock to an extent, even though it's serious and deadly and all that. But you can never, ever, ever use your own conscience to judge how far governments are going to go, because they're way, way beyond any conscience of you to get what they want. That's when you start learning about things. There's countless cases of folk getting assassinated, not just down through history, but even in recent history, or even the last 100 years and so on, in the Western countries. And of course, accidents are easy to do, hit and runs and so on. And in the US, it's very, very simple. With drive-by shootings, for instance, many of the cases of these drive-by shootings hit people who literally were targeted for extinction. And there just happened to be a bunch of people walking along the sidewalk. No. The best assassinations in that case, cheap to do and so on, are to use a lot of people to get the one person you're after. Aircraft have been down before with other passengers just to get the one person. It makes it look more plausible. Well, just engine failure or pilot error or whatever it happens to be. This kind of thing happens, absolutely. When it's worth it, they'll do it, believe you me. That's how it's done. But we're so trusting, because you see, the higher you go in anything to do with agencies, etc., the more psychopathic ones, just like big business, get up to the top and to the top echelons of power. And they will use these forces with impunity, and they have no conscience, and they don't have nervous breakdowns about things. when they reflect on it. They don't need pills or viruses in the brain like the articles in the last few years that would destroy recent memory. They don't need any of that stuff, you see. They don't have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Just the opposite, in fact. And these folk exist, and they're assassination squads. Sure they do. They used to have up on YouTube some of the assassination squads of other countries going into hotels, very well organized. You can see the training involved. As the first little team goes in, blah, 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 sets it up. The second team go in, they go into the room, bump off the person supposed to be bumped off. And the next one, cleaners go in and clean up any fingerprints and so on. And then you see them all going to the airport, picked up on security cameras. Yeah, this happens all the time, this kind of thing. Absolutely. So we've got to grow up. And it's not pleasant growing up from a nice security, the feeling of a child, you see. If you're lucky enough to have decent parents, if you're lucky enough. Because remember, your parents have been under attack too. If you have parents, in fact, in this day and age, under tremendous attacks to destroy them and their relationships, etc., and to cause incredible dissatisfaction by many different techniques too. And definitely children suffer. But if you grew up with a happy childhood and a good schooling where everything seemed happy, and their teachings weren't brutes, then you're probably well indoctrinated into the world's all quite nice. Because in reality, it's not. I remember years ago going over how much money is taxed off us, that we can get our hands on, the records that is, because we don't get much truth on anything at all from our very secretive governments. And how much money we spend, forget their wages and so on, and the big handouts they give to their pals or relatives in the big corporations and so on. Because most big businesses today are funded by the public. Public-private partnerships, they call it. We used to call it just grand theft, but now it's public-private partnerships. And it sounds much better, doesn't it? But when you realize how much money we're spending for wars that have got nothing to do with defending us, the ones who are paying for all, for wars that don't even benefit us with plunder. We don't get the plunder either, like they did in the old days. And it's for other reasons altogether. But when you see where it all goes to, how on earth could you possibly call yourself free? Why would you even vote for such a system as that? And why would you ever believe up any politician when they promise you anything? Really, perpetual childhood brought up by good parents in cotton wool and lots of fairy tales and decent, happy schooling, and you're never hungry, etc., etc. Well brainwashed, well conditioned. But as I've said before, not everyone can handle truth. And we've all experienced it, I'm sure, talking to some people who are nice people. But you see their eyes clouding over because when you give someone truth on something, and you're not berating them like some kind of street evangelist accusing them of anything, but you're just telling them some quiet truth. All truth requires a response from the individual, because just knowing something, makes you have to decide things. We're quite happy to decide things if we don't have to act on anything. But some truths almost demand that you act, even if it's just as something so simple as occasionally telling a person about the same conclusion you've come to on a matter. But when it comes to overloading a person, never overload a person with too much information. They'll switch off, quite naturally too. When you've had a lifetime of indoctrination, especially with the drivel that they give you today called news, you really expect them just to say, oh, I understand it all. Okay, thanks for telling me. I've seen over this last while some top reporters who've played the game, because they all play the game too for their own survival, but top ones admitting now that they go into sites for news which they would never have dared to go into before, because you can't get anything real on your main so-called above board media. It's that bad today. And it truly is. There's also a technique being put into place which folk haven't quite caught on to. It isn't just the banning of factual news, it's the purposes of it. The purpose being you're being trained into a system for a global society, a different society from the one you had when you had a nation. And the society is training you into a system, a global system, where you'll be run again by professionals, the experts, the technocrats, basically. And you'll only be told enough to keep the system going. And anything really relevant you will not be told. Very much like the communist system of China right now. Very, very, very similar indeed. Where you don't have to know all these things. They'll tell you what to think about, and they'll tell you what you should know. But they'll definitely, a lot of things will be forbidden you think about, or even talk about, etc. And we're seeing that being implemented here now. And so it's for a post-nation state, basically, into a world state. We're being trained. And eventually, very quickly, maybe 20 years maximum, by 20 years, everybody will just accept that what's given, dished out as news, even though there's nothing there, really. But they'll accept it as all been quite normal, and that things that they weren't told, if it ever crept out one way or another, it won't even anger them that they weren't told, that they won't expect to be told anything that really, really matters to them, because you're going into a collectivist society. Now, I'm just going to mention a few articles. I did for once, I got a stack of articles of things I've been thinking about and looking things up and collecting them, because we are going through astonishing times. These are historical events that are happening, and most people are being kept in the dark about it, or treating it like it's unimportant or whatever. Astonishing events are happening. And it's not conspiracy theory when it's out of the mouths of a lot of the people involved in it. It's just amazing, but that's what we're in today. So I'll mention some, of course, that will tie in with a big agenda. When you do realize you're in a system that's to be run efficiently, that was always the goal of technocracy, to run a system efficiently. You couldn't have a democratic system. You might use the illusion of a democracy, but you could never have efficiency and democracy. Couldn't happen. As I mentioned before, people couldn't have all their rights either in an efficient system. In an individualistic system, you definitely, it would never work. You had to be a collectivist society and train the public to be the same, to dress the same, to look the same, to whatever happens to be, to have the same hobbies, same interests, same. And then, of course, you give them the same news, and they won't question it. Well, that's long past that phase. But now it's into the system of not just preventing pregnancy, as they overload you with sex and destroy marriage. Because believe you me, if you can promote sexuality, it's the novelty of the new partners that causes their excitement. That's what they push. You understand that? And so you're never going to be happy with the same partner. That's intentional. It's simple warfare. What makes people bond together? Well, this is what makes them bond together and trust and all the rest of it. How do you destroy it? Well, here's how you destroy it. Entertainment, blah, blah. All done, folks. Old news, isn't it? And then, of course, the state picks up, as I say, the problem of fallout from it, from like pregnancy. Well, they'll deal with it. Again, collectively, the taxpayers are forced to pay for these things. If you're not paying for wars and bullets and bombs for big corporations to plunder countries, you're paying for other things too that you've got nothing to do with. And you might be against, in fact. But you're forced to do it. You're coerced and threatened if you don't pay up for these things to be implemented. Now they're going to the phase again for the elderly. And I saw this coming years and years and years ago. And I even give talks denying it. It says, they start first in abortion and get used to that. It's okay, dehumanize a baby into a fetus, a term. and just dehumanize it, and eventually you go for the elderly. Well, they're old and you're just stupid old smelly geezers, Dehumanize them. And then Quebec court invalidates some requirements for assisted. One of many, many articles. I don't want to depress people. People want to be happy all the time because the entertainment makes them money. They seek distraction, and distraction generally comes. You don't want to go anything that's really, really serious until people can't go into anything that's serious. Until eventually they got phobias if you hit something serious. Oh no, don't say that. Don't read that article. Oh God, they freak out. And I mentioned before about assisted and how, again, Quebec really, really pushed it fast and hard and copied the Dutch system, etc. And I mentioned too before about one article, I think last week, about this is, again, the dehumanization process, first of all. And then you make it, they're going senile. Well, you see, Canada is now going to the next step, which had to come, where they could actually try and encourage you that if you're going to or go senile, for instance, within, say, 3 or 4 or 5 years, why not just take you? As time goes on, they'll convince the people to go along with that very quickly, because you could be a burden on society. I mean, you feel guilty that you're still living. I'm not kidding you. This is all what's going on right now. So I'll put this article up there. And in Canada, moving to allow human use of certain diseases and illnesses while bullying hospices as part of palliative care. For those who want to read it, for those who want to be happy, just continue on your merry way until it's your turn, maybe when the state decides that why should they keep you alive? Which one of the founders of the Fabian Society, George Bernard Shaw, said, and there's an audio out there, it's actually a early film clip of him, saying that when we are in control, meaning this true socialistic system of technocracy, he said, when we're in control, you'll have to come to us and argue why we should keep you. Even if it's a healthy person, if there's no work for you, for instance, why should they keep you? Huh? So anyway, it mentions Quebecers who, when right to seek, after both have been turned aside by their physicians. Because now they're going into it, you see, the same as Holland went into it, and started to add more and more categories, like, they're depressed. Even for teenagers, I'm depressed, I'm a teenager, big deal. I can see in the end of the world being depressed when you're a teenager until you really mature. Huh? They used to call it growing pains, and being depressed on and off is part of it. And who says you're supposed to be manically happy for the rest of your life except for the ads that you see on TV? Huh? Buy this and you're ha. No. You're not supposed to be happy all the time. There's a stable state in between. So anyway, they're going further and further and keeping adding to the different categories to have you. Now they're having lawyers' debates at all. And of course, we've been teaching this under bioethics since at least the 90s openly. That when they first gave us on television, he's a bioethicist. What's a bioethicist? Yeah. Or someone who's trained in ethics or biology, meaning the human condition. Oh, really? Wow. So these folk then are the ones who'll decide. Yeah, we went through a course on it, and we've decided it's not fit that we should keep you on, even though your mind's okay, and we could keep you on. It costs a few bucks, and we could use that a few bucks for this big corporation that's going to go off and have wars and so on, That's how it's done. That's the real world. And as I say, you wonder why a lot of folk can't handle the real world. It's a horror show. This real, true reality, folks. It certainly isn't a human or humane system. Although the ones at the top will say it's survival of the fittest, and they see themselves as the fittest. That's how it is. Very simple. And then this article too. Why everyone is talking about free cash handouts. It's an explainer on universal basic income. Most folk don't understand what it is, but again, that's what Bertrand Russell discussed in the 1940s. They'd eventually bring in and they give you credits issued by the states. And now everything's electronic. You issued so many credits, or doesn't matter what they call it, for money. It's credits, but it's a method of controlling you as well. But it'll be announced, actually, it's a wonderful thing for these folk who will get a guaranteed income for sitting at home and having no work and no purpose and being depressed, you see. And then, of course, down the road, they'll actually have you. But after all, we're giving you free money every month, just for... You think I'm kidding, eh? It's an agenda. So I'll put some of these links up for some of the stories. I say so much of this stuff now you can't even say anymore. Because the ones at the top mean business. The teeth are showing, and the glove is off. The velvet glove is off the fist, iron fist. Jobs of the future are clustering in a handful of U.S. cities. Such study finds. Oh, wow! What a revelation, eh? Agenda 21. Everyone must move off the rural areas into the already overcrowded cities, eh? And then you had the UN declaration of mega cities and super cities, etc. And then they gave a whole list of, remember the military Department of Defense, the big think tank, I read it on the air years ago, when they said that we'll have the end of the nation states into a global system, but there'll be the closest thing to any sovereignty will be super states, actual states or cities within this world conglomerate. It's all there. You're living an agenda. You understand? If things were just developing willy-nilly, you could have all kinds of alternatives to everything. But nope. No. You're going along a definite agenda, folks, with the super cities. Oh, jobs of the future clustering a handful of US cities, study finds, yeah. And that's what is happening. They're building high-rises in a lot of the cities. But it's to bring in the ones who are involved in the electronic tech industry, computers and so on. Of course it is. And these people are now nomads. They call them nomads, according to Jack Satali in his books. Up at the United Nations, of course, that's where he is. And he's the one who said winners and losers in the coming New World Order. And then the other one too, A Brief History of the Future, where everybody's got their nomadic devices, that's what your little communicator is. And you'll travel around the world. You'll just go to where the work is when you're called. You'll have no real basic home or permanent home, etc., for the up and coming technocratic types, you see. It's all there. But the cities, of course, are to be super cities, and you get off the land into the super cities by the end of the nation states, of course. Agenda. But people living through, even though they hear it, still don't want to believe it, even when it's happening, even when eventually they'll end up in a super city and at the end of their national sovereignty. I think I mentioned too the previous week that a Romanian-born academic says he recently left his tenure position at Columbia University because the Ivy League school is on its way towards full-blown communism. This is a guy who was brought up and left Romania because of the communistic system when it was under it. And now he's left his tenure position at Columbia University in the States because it's going to be full-blown communism. To change the future, you must always get to the young. You see, the up-and-coming managerial class, you brainwash them and you promise them utopias, and they become tyrants over the rest of the public to make them all conform. Mind you, they get paid well to do it, and folk do an awful lot of things that they're paid well. Another article too, Afghanistan War, the Crime of the Century, by Ron Paul. But I remember it when they first went into Afghanistan, how they planned it before 9/11 happened, of course, and they went, and they remember Russia, that was his Vietnam, and the US already had his Vietnam, remember, and they're supposed to have learned from that. Don't get bogged down in a long, drawn-out war that you can't really win, or you wouldn't be allowed to win, put it that way. That's for sure. The same thing happened. They went right in after the Soviet Union had exhausted itself in Afghanistan and other places, but mainly Afghanistan, and took over from there. Did the same darn thing up until this day, and they're bogged down, got no further forward. Everything's corrupt there, as it's always been, and it's a graveyard of nations, Afghanistan, that's what they used to call it. invaders always get bogged down, exhausted, bankrupt, and that was it. Mind you, the US did. And I hate to say the terms US. The US is just another satrapy of world ownership of their true world rulers. And the US did put in roads to big areas for heavy-duty mineral resources. They built them all and all that. Taxed the taxpayers of America, just like Britain did for across India, and that we put in railroads, etc., for the owners of Britain to take all the loot out and the resources. They did the same thing for the US in Afghanistan, and they paid for it all, thanks to the taxpayers. And then they even guarded the convoys of Chinese trucks coming in to take the resources out. It was a deal they'd made with it. It's just astonishing the things that go on, isn't it? Eh? Really. And if you dig into the corporations really that owned it all, it's the same old bunch again that are awfully well known for being involved in heavy-duty mining and minerals. But anyway, this Afghanistan a war crime of this century. I'll put that up too. And it's not bad, it's just the truth. And forget politics or forget Ron Paul and politics, but the facts are the facts as he puts them out there, at least on this particular issue, put it that way. I'll put that up. And then this article too is interesting. Boris, the new Blair, you don't understand how you're presented with people that you're supposed to like or dislike, however, in politics. It's all built up for them, and they play their parts awfully well. Whoever the politician or leader or pretended leader happens to be, like Boris, amazing guy, this Boris Johnson, as I want to call him, although he's got a long family history from all over part of Europe and elsewhere. It's called Boris, the New Blair. It's by Peter Hitchens, and he gives you some of the personality type of Boris Johnson and the history of him too. Now, and it's true, he's been put in there as the conservative leader of Britain, right? This guy, now remember, he was the mayor of the City of London. If you're the mayor of the City of London, you're part of the folk who own the country, you know. But Boris is good at playing the part of the clown, so he's been put up. It's a change from Theresa May, you know, that's all. It says, he attended the most expensive and snobbish school in the world, which is Eton. He speaks the language of P.G. Wodehouse heroes in a waffly, archaic voice that invites derision, yet he has persuaded legions of the nation's poorest and most deprived people to vote for his Conservative Party, a party they've been brought up to hate. It's really interesting too, there's a lot going on in the Labour Party, and I really don't play politics, because it's all corrupt, but with the Labour Party, and Corbyn's been having trouble for the last 2 years, and it was in the papers as to who was causing the trouble. Because they wanted someone else in, and they got Boris in, and they'd be very similar to what they had. And again, the old alliance of the hands across the water, the pond, between the US and Britain for the next war. And this is what everybody's really uptight about, because it looks like, you know, that's what they're doing right now, is getting ready for the next war for Iran, as we all know. It's well publicised, if you care to look. And it's on the list. It's going to be fulfilled. Everything on the list, every country on the list has to be knocked out in the Stone Age, you see. So behind the clown face of Boris Johnson, of course, he gets elected in as some kind of saviour, because everybody's so sick of Theresa May and the Brexit idea that it's went nowhere. And again, they hammered this archaic system of socialist Labour of Britain. This totally international. Why vote for a system that's going to make you, you know, international? Why would you have a national vote for it to start with? Think about it. But apart from that, he was hammered and hammered by certain factions to split him up and to make the public think that he was really against certain things that were just naughty and bad and nasty. That was all intentional. And remember too that there's a bit of leeway amongst political parties, as Carol Quigley talked about. The ones at the top are allowed a certain amount of competition, but the ones at the top always play the game once they're in. They'll swear allegiance to play the game for the ones who really own the country. Anyway, it says here, what's more radical? A patrician swell. A swell is like a big swell guy, you know, who openly lives in the nation's most famous house with a woman who is not his wife, after a well-publicized life of unfaithfulness to the woman who actually is his wife. Or a lower middle class ultra leftist, that's Corbyn, who used to take holidays in East Germany and has an incurable liking for Latin American revolutionaries and unlovable Middle Eastern Islamists. But when you look at it from a perspective of just where did the time fly, this is of someone who's pretending now. They've sold you as a conservative. Isn't that amazing? Eh? Boris Johnson, conservative. So it's really something. Peter Hitchens explains it because he was a Marxist too. Everybody was churned out of the universities back in Hitchens' day. It turned out as a Marxist. Why would a country too, and these universities, believe you me, really do exist on big handouts from the government, the taxpayers? Oh, absolutely. Maggie Thatcher went through a lot of derision about that too, when she said, well, we've got to keep subsidising these private places like this because they turn out they're our future leaders who must know each other and meet each other when they're students. And, you know. But here's Peter Hitchens, who went through it, and he became a Marxist. He says, who knows what happened to the revolutionary cause, that it shifted from storming the barracks and the railroad station to infiltrating the TV studio, the school, and the university. I would always go for the cultural and moral action as against the political gesture. And the patrician Tory leader Boris Johnson is the revolutionary, the harbinger of the future. The bearded militant Jeremy Corbyn is a relic of the dead past. Just 20 years ago, and perhaps less than that, Mr. Johnson's personal life could have been tolerated in a prime minister only if he kept it secret. But his private life, as his Edwardian forebears did. But to live openly in this way would have been an explosive challenge to the establishment, especially to his own party. Even now, some of his aides no doubt have misgivings about it, but I'm sure he will overcome them. He genuinely sees nothing wrong with what he does, and so others learn quickly to see nothing wrong in it either. And there's other reasons too, which he doesn't go into here, but it's a good enough article about it, how they can sell you anything, can't they? They really can sell you anything. Like they sold Americans. They gave Americans the choice of Hillary Clinton to vote for, and people literally would have voted for the Satan at the time and presented you with Donald Trump, because no one wanted Clinton in. And Trump, of course, literally, I couldn't believe it. Folk believed it. There was no choice for people to vote for in America. In reality, there really wasn't. And the little bits I listened to and read about from Trump, it didn't make me any pro-Trump or anything, because I listened to what he said at the beginning, before he got in. But much of the stuff he was talking about then, he's done. Right down to even increasing surveillance on every citizen and really helping the research and development for more surveillance equipment in top companies, not just American companies either, by the way. It was rather open to me what was going on there. And now it should be open to everybody. But there was nobody to vote for. But they can really sell you it, can't they? They're awfully good at selling you these fake leaders. Another article, two epic cop-out world's climate chiefs at the Conference of Parties 25, they call it, decide it's just too complex, the whole idea of saving the world for the climate and carbon and so on. So they kick the carbon emissions can down the road till next year, right? Because they just can't get through what they want to get through to tax us for existing, you see, through this or carbon dioxide, etc. I'm going to tell you, we really are in Plato's cave, and everything, if you're brought up in the cave, everything will be real to you. All the shadows are really just, these are ancestors. This is the spirits of their ancestors going back and forth in the cave. That's what they are. It's got nothing to do with, if you were able to look back and see the light outside there and realize that, no, there's people passing and animals passing outside the cave there, it's casting these shadows. You mustn't see that, you see. We're in the cave. Anyway, this is the disgraceful collapse of the COP25 Gabfest in Madrid, while it was running 2 days over schedule, is an indictment of everything those in attendance purported to stand for. Because people are just fed up with it all. Because at least enough people are now starting to see that this is a complete financial scam and also for total control of the planet and everybody on it. Of course it is. Yes, it is. And that's not conspiracy theory. It's from their own mouths from many years past. I've got stacks and stacks of their own publications and what they've been saying for many, many years. Quite amazing. It really is quite amazing, isn't it? No, also there's a matter of fact, from a politician, like, again, Ron Paul, a matter of fact article on the system. Congress is Trump's co-conspirator against liberty, it says. Imagine that President Trump spent his phone call with the Ukrainian president threatening to withhold military aid unless the Ukrainian government agreed to use the money to purchase weapons from a US manufacturer. Does anyone seriously think that foreign service professionals and deep state operatives would be so shocked and offended by Trump's request that they would launch efforts to impeach him? Would Congress view this as high crimes and misdemeanors, or applaud Trump for carrying out the one of modern president's supposedly most important jobs, acting as salesman for the American military-industrial complex? Well, but of course he won't go into the fact, though, the truth. The fact, if Trump went off and got the wars over and done with, and really went, hammer and tongs against Syria, because that's on the list too, they haven't finished that off yet. And also Iran. That was part of the reason he got put in, not by the people. And they've got to get on, and really they're building up for it now. Trump's got more and more troops going on quietly all the time over and over to the bases around Iran. And they're building up to it, and I'm no doubt Boris will be getting it. He'll do his Tony Blair bit. That's part of that previous article I mentioned, that he's kind of like Blair in that way, getting ready for the big one. And Trump will be every media outlet will be suddenly praising Trump overnight if he gets the wars going. That's a fact. That's just a fact, folks. And neoliberal economics destroyed the economy and the middle class. And that was by Paul Craig Roberts, who says some good things now and then, But it's true. It's been that was part of the agenda too, of eliminate middle class. Long agenda, that one. And once your factories were all given across to China, and all the levels of manufacturing were gone, then a lot of the middle class has gone as well, naturally, sure. And Holland, again, that's got to be also good, and to prove to its citizens that the governments are on board with the whole, sustainability agenda. That you see tractors, farm tractors clog Dutch streets as farmers and builders protest over the government's nitrogen policy. They want to stop using nitrogen and fertilizer for the fields and your crops, you see. Again, start taking down your food supply, which is energy, and you'll see illness and creep in and malnourishment and death. There you go. Also, fresh evidence that the United Nations watchdog suppressed report casting doubt on Assad, that's Syria's Assad, gas attack. Awfully important article, actually, where people who are they're paid to be watchdogs went in there, and they said that the heavy powers wanted them to say that Assad was behind these gassings, but he wasn't. This is a good article. I'll put up the links for this one. For anyone who cares to look, most folk don't care if it's not titillating, Because we're entertained to death, and folk want to be entertained even through what they think is in news. Goldman Sachs, reportedly in talks to admit guilt, pay $2 billion fine to sell a probe into Malaysian investment fund, which they'd set up and so on. But they still come out great, because you see, it says they're set to pay $2 billion in fine and admit guilt to the US government to resolve an investigation into the so-called IMDb scandal, the Wall Street Journal reported Thursday. And the deal would involve Goldman admitting it ignored warning signs as billions of dollars were stolen from a Malaysian government fund that it worked with. So here they are. I think it all came all together, that the cost of it to Malaysia, that the Goldman Sachs had been given or worked with $4.5 billion. So regardless of the $2 billion fine, they're still $2.5 billion better off, aren't they? It's not bad. But again, it pays to have friends in high places, or actually be the people in high places, isn't it? You can get a lot done that way. But it's not a bad article. But billions of dollars are stolen, right? And so there you go. It's the same Goldman Sachs that paid and had admitted that they got paid and to write glowing articles for admission into the EU of Greece, glowing articles after going over the books. And of course, Greece was not fit at the moment, at that time, to go in with the kind of money that they owed and so on. You can trust your banks, Yep, isn't that how the ads all go, eh? It's quite good. And this article too is how the war party lost the Middle East. It's called by Patrick Buchanan, that folk love to hate as well. But the article's all right in itself. A lot of facts in it. Facts are important. And for those who want some facts, sometimes a lot of folk don't want facts. They just want, again, titillation and ooh and ah. Or, as I said in the Bible, I called it itchy ears, itching ears. Just tell me more fascinating stuff, you see. And that's what folk, because they're entertained to death now, isn't it? And then we'll go into this one here. And again, which again makes folk wonder about the coming war with Iran. It's got Netanyahu and Pompeo push forward with the US-Israel Defense Pact. Folk are just getting fed up with these wars, obviously. Putin and the Biden Memorial Pipeline to China. Again, another not bad article. Goes through some of the history going back to 2014. Deals with Ukraine and so on, and pipelines, etc. There's always much more than you hear about for what happens. Generally, there's money behind it all. There's always money behind it. Money for somebody, but never for the general population. And then what's happening, it's a good lesson to what's left of the world, actually. It says Swedish Justice Ministry manipulated crime statistics, according to a study that's been done and released. How they underreport certain things to try to make the situation look happy. But remember, Sweden has had an awful time of mass migration. And of course there's fallout. I've read some of it myself until they stopped giving you most of the data on it. It's been very quiet in Sweden, according to mainstream media. But here you go. This article is about how the Justice Ministry, they should Justice Ministry, how what an oxymoron, isn't it? When it's lying to the people that it's supposed to serve. Plato's cave, There you go. Back in it again. I guess that's all I'll probably get time for. Anyway, that's my time. Unfortunately, it's short in as always. And I could have gone on for another hour or more if I just read other articles, which it's best not to read these days, because we're living in amazing times. There's so many powerful factions now, very powerful factions that could be terribly dangerous to everyone. We know that. Even down to the wars that are coming up, we know that. The list is, that was published in the 90s is still there, of countries to be taken out. We all know this. These powerful institutions won't stop. They won't stop until they get their wars underway and so on. And out of the wars, the whole world gets changed to the next step, which is all worked out as well. Carl Quigley said that wars will change all participants in the wars. The victors, the defeated, doesn't make any difference. They all get changed along the same road, basically, for what he called a form of planned progress. Anyway, for myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.